reading, and so since some people have been to some other readings, I'll do a few new things and some things that I've read before to just give you a sense of the flavor of the book and a few of the characters, and but try not to have too many spoilers, because this is a book that has some twists and turns, and I don't want to give away too much. So there'll be a little bit toward the end of everything, and then I will answer any questions that you might have. I promise to answer all questions. I don't promise to answer them all honestly. So this is your opportunity to ask me all those deeply personal questions that you've always wanted to ask, or that you would like to ask now. So, okay. So I'm going to give you a little bit from the beginning and skip around just a little bit because I want to have time for questions. So, this book starts out, Maddie Lee Watson is the narrator, for those of you who haven't started the book yet, and she is 15, and she's a little bit sassy for her age. Although, are there 15-year-olds that aren't sassy?
She's sassy.
She's talking about Mr. James T. Cullowhee, who has just come to town. He is the KUDZU King. So I'm going to start a little bit after the beginning. When the KUDZU King parked in front of the feed store and stepped out onto the running board, everything came to a stop. Mothers paused mid-sentence. Men's tobacco spit splattered silently in Pepsi-Cola bottles. Little girls froze in their reach for scattered jacks, and Danny's next pitch seemed to hang suspended in a long curve to home plate. The doors on the truck read, Mr. James T. Cullowhee, the KUDZU King. But you had only to look at him to know he was royalty. Imagine that, a man in a suit and tie when it wasn't a Sunday wedding or funeral. And such a man with golden hair like the Greek gods we'd studied in junior high. His suit was the forget-me-not blue of his eyes, his white shirt so bright you had to squint to look at him. As for his tie, you couldn't tell if he'd chosen that tie to match his truck or had the truck painted to go with the tie. I'm going to skip a little bit ahead to Mr. Cullowhee. This is Mr. Cullowhee's second or third speech here in this section. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cullowhee stood up, his truck bed still bursting with green sprigs. A few men had ambled over, including my daddy, who looked at his piece of kudzu as if trying to decipher it. As you hold in your hands your very own kudzu cutting, I want to tell you about a special gift for you from the United States government. Uncle Sam is prepared to pay every farmer in America $5 an acre to plant this magnificent crop. That's not what it will cost you. That's what the government wants to put in your pocket without asking a thing in return. With this crop, no act of nature can diminish that rich soil you've worked to maintain, not water, not wind, not even the ravages of time. Friends, our government believes so deeply in the future of kudzu that it is willing to pay you to plant it. And I'm here to make that possible. Lynette touched my chin. Close your mouth, Maddie, she said. You're gawking. But I've never seen... I know, she sighed. You've never seen a man as handsome as Gary Cooper. You've never seen one as suave as Cary Grant. You've never seen one as... That's not fair, and you know it. I couldn't take my eyes off Mr. James T. Cullowhee as he perched on the tailgate. Not one of them has ever come to Cooper County. He hiked up his trouser legs, revealing yellow argyle socks and black Oxfords so shiny I could have done my hair in their reflection. I'm afraid I can only stay a few minutes more, he said, his voice low and confidential. The fine people of Monroe County, Alabama have asked me to reveal the secrets of kudzu farming. So I'm on my way to lend a hand as they plant their first crop. But in 2 weeks, I'll be back to help you get in your own kudzu crop and to assist you in organizing Cooper County's first annual kudzu festival. Picture this. Mr. Cullowhee stood balancing on his chrome bumper and spread his arms to encompass Main Street. Grandstands lining the sidewalks, kudzu vines draped from lampposts, your high school marching band playing Stars and Stripes Forever, followed by your mayor, the town council, and the fine farmers and businessmen of Cooper County. And the centerpiece of it all, a float full of kudzu, graced by a bevy of breathtaking beauties, one of whom will represent Cooper County as your kudzu queen, wearing He reached into the massive leaves and pulled out a green velvet case, opening it to reveal a jeweled crown. This tiara. I imagined him placing that tiara on my head, me bowing a little, modestly. You plant that little sprig of kudzu I gave you, and by the time I return, you'll be well on your way to a cellar of your own kudzu flower jelly. Even your cows will be thanking me, saying, how soon can I get some of that delicious kudzu? It's a cash crop, a miracle crop. Everything you touch will turn to green. It'll make every one of you, man, woman, and child, as rich as Croesus. He leapt to the ground and climbed into his truck. 2 short weeks, he said, and I'll be back. Leaning out the window, he added, and soon after that, one of you pretty girls will be crowned the KUDZU Queen of Cooper County. We watched him drive down Main Street, the crowd partying to let him pass. As his truck diminished in the distance, even the dust that rose behind him seemed magical, lightly tinged with green and gleaming with hope. We were going to be the richest county in North Carolina, and one of us, one lucky girl, was going to be a queen. So, by the way, if you haven't had any yet, there's some cheese straws that I made with kudzu jelly. So, I just want you to know, I made these just for y'all. So, you met Lynette briefly, but she's pretty important in the book, so I wanted to devote some more time to her. And you're going to find out how Lynette and Maddie met in one moment. This is thirsty work. There's whiskey in here.
Kudzu moonshine.
Kudzu moonshine. Well, actually, I've heard that kudzu makes a terrible biofuel, but a great beer. So I don't know what kind of moonshine it makes. Lynette and I had 3.5 years of history between us. We met on the first day of 7th grade, a day that had begun poorly when I was panicked out of bed by my alarm clock at 5. Just because I got to go to school didn't mean the chickens didn't need feeding and the cow didn't have to be milked, my mother informed me every September. Got to go to school like it was a privilege. Then, when I was milking sassafras, she kicked the bucket. Not died, which would have been all right by me, but actually kicked the bucket, spilling 15 minutes of hard work. When I came into the house 3 cups of steaming milk short, my mother knew exactly what had happened and had the gall to say to me, now there's a cow who won't stand to have her teats yanked, which I wasn't doing. Or not much, anyway. So I was not in the best mood when I waited for the bus on my first day at Cooper River Junior High. And matters got worse when my cream-colored first day of school dress, which I didn't much like anyway, since it made me look even bonier than I already was, got coated with red clay dust thanks to Mickey Davenport's rusty Ford pickup and our stupid dirt road. Then I arrived at school and discovered that nothing I had learned in elementary had prepared me for junior high. Danny and a few of his friends had tried to tell me, but being smarter than everyone in the known universe, I hadn't bothered to listen. Not only was the day divided into class periods between which students flocked like geese from classroom to classroom, but all the girls I thought were my friends had miraculously acquired both boyfriends and breasts over the summer, though I'm not sure in which order. I couldn't be bothered with an old flat chest like me anymore. So there I was, friendless, confused, irritated, and on top of that, what had they given me for my first day of class, first class of the day, before I was even fully awake? Home economics. Now, if it had had the slightest thing to do with real economics, I would have been okay. Math and science had always been a breeze for me. They had facts. Even English was all right, especially when we got to debate. But no, Miss Eleanor Dunn expected me to bake souffles and sew ruffled aprons. Me, who could burn water. Me, in whose hand a needle was an instrument of accidental but inevitable self-torture. Of course, nobody wanted to be my kitchen buddy. The other girls had probably linked up weeks ago in the middle of summer, planning for this moment, and now marched blithely arm in arm down the row of stoves to pick the one they'd share for the rest of the semester. My future was clear. I was going to turn into Miss Eleanor Dunn, who'd never married and who devoted her life to making home and hearth in room 207 of Cooper River Junior High. Miss Maddie Lee Watson, said Miss Dunn, her voice creaking with rust. Do we stand before stove 19. Vesuvius, that stove was called. Though I didn't know that at the time, despite the fact that it was common knowledge. Most of the other girls had heard about the infamous stove from their older sisters, a commodity my parents had short-sightedly neglected to provide me with, which might have been the reason stove number 19 was, like me, abandoned. At that moment, 3 things happened. The oven door on number 19 fell open, hitting me sharply on the knee. An anonymous boy rushing past the classroom window, which had been raised in the frail hope that a cool breeze might chance by, paused in his passage and let out a huge fart. A Notre Dame of a fart. A Beethoven's Ninth of a fart. And Lynette Johnson, soft, skinny, with wispy, pale brown hair and green eyes, strewing apologies like milkweed, flustered into class, came to a halt beside the only partnerless person in the room and closed the oven door. Everything you need to know about teenage girls you can learn by spending 5 minutes in a hen house, if you dare. The hens huddle together, clacking a lot without saying much. But if one lets on she's different, the rest are liable to peck her to death. The other girls' cafeteria tables were always mysteriously full when I looked for a place to sit. And when they gathered in the halls, planning sleepovers and boy-girl parties, their huddles hushed as I passed, then spilled over with mean laughter. If I planned to survive the hen house of junior high and eventually high school, I was going to need an ally. And Lynette, sweet and innocent as she was, needed one too. There may be better reasons for starting a best friendship, but so far, I haven't heard any. So as time passes, the KUDZU King does in fact come back to town, and Lynette's father, whom you'll get to know in the book, not the nicest person in the world, offers the KUDZU King a place to stay in their house. So the KUDZU King is now living at Lynette's best friend's house, which happens to be next door to hers. So it's a good thing, right? And so Maddie often spends the night with Lynette, and this is one of those nights shortly after the KUDZU King moves in. Mr. Cullowhee didn't come home until after midnight. Though I heard his step on the stairs, I didn't wake Lynette. I thought of him in Lynette's room, surrounded by her faded wallpaper. I imagined the bed creaking as he climbed in, wearing the blue and white striped pajamas Lynette had described, his jaw shiny with golden stubble. I imagined his long fingers untying his pajama string and slipping under the cool cloth. I felt excited and sad at the same time, like a child who's old enough to know that her birthday bicycle means no new dress for Mama this year, but it's too late to give it back and say she didn't really want it. The cicadas hummed, one long chorus of the same note. There were so many cicadas that hundreds could stop to draw breath, while hundreds more filled in the gap, never leaving a lull. Lynette snuffled occasionally in sleep, and arms reach away. I lay on my back, staring at the beadboard ceiling. It was, I knew, painted pale blue to keep the hates away. They won't cross water, my grandfather had told me when I was little, and no more will they cross a porch ceiling painted blue like water, so they can't get into the house. The ceiling looks silver gray in the dark, but I like the idea of lying underwater, languid as a mermaid, with no more responsibility for my actions. I imagined the KUDZU King lying next to me on the narrow cot, balanced on his side, staring into my eyes like he was hypnotized. May I touch your leg? He would ask. And like a game of Mother May I, where there's only one possible answer, I'd say, yes, you may. What Lynette felt for Bobby Mason was a crush, and crushes are made for confidences, but I was in love, a far lonelier thing. I looked at her skinny face in the moonlight. Poor child, I thought, I'm leaving you behind. Through the open upstairs window, I heard Aggie calling out and thrashing in her sleep. Catherine, across the room from Aggie, tended to float all night like a log down a slow river. I heard Mrs. Johnson tend to Aggie, heard her soft murmurs in the bedroom above, while in my mind the Kudzu King asked, "May I lift your nightgown?" And my bare arms and feet glowed atop white sheets. Sleep was something ordinary people did. Sleep and touching the ground when you walked and breathing regularly. The room above quieted and Lynette rolled over, pressing her face into her pillow. We were the only ones awake, my imagined Kudzu King and I. I could tell him to stay or go, except the only thing I remembered how to say was, "Yes, you may." And then I remembered something else about the real Kudzu King, James Cullowhee. He was upstairs, a naked man under respectable pajamas. I wondered if he was lying in bed, thinking of me, thinking of asking, "May I touch your leg?" So, Lynette is Maddie's best friend, her current best friend, but she has an oldest friend named Rose, and she hasn't seen Rose in a while. She rediscovers her because Maddie, once the Kudzu Queen competition is announced, the mayor's wife steps up and offers to give lady lessons, basically. So deportment lessons, you know, how to walk, how to talk, how to drink tea with your pinky extended, you know, all the things that Kudzu Queens need to know, right? And so they all go to the mayor's house once a week and learn how to be ladies. And while they're over, Maddie discovers Rose Moore. She tinkled a brass bell, and in walked Rose Moore, a girl about my age, in a black dress and white collar. Rose and I had been friends when we were little. Even then, she'd been distinctive, with dark brown skin, steady green eyes, and a quick mind. Rose was no relation to Mabel, though there were lots of Moores in the county, both colored and white. Rose's daddy, Luther, was a tenant on one of the farms we'd inherited from Granddaddy, a couple miles from us. I used to go over to their house with Daddy whenever he needed to fix a pipe or nail down a loose sheet of tin on the barn roof or help out with the tobacco harvest. It took me years to catch on to the fact that most people with tenants didn't pitch in with planting or harvesting, but Daddy claimed he'd never felt quite right standing by when a man didn't have one grown child to his name and needed to get the tobacco in before the rain. While he and Luther worked, Rose and I could do anything we wanted, as long as we stayed away from the juke joint and the river. We were fascinated by the juke joint, with walls that seemed to pulse to the music, even in the middle of the day, and a bright red neon sign that alternated the words cold and beer. But we obeyed and spent most of our time creating amateur theatricals on Rose's front porch, forcing her cousin Evelyn to be our audience until our daddies finished and we could persuade them to watch our princess stories. Some days, Rose's mother left her at our house on her way to work in town. We'd play tea party with acorn cups and ginkgo leaves, or climb trees and pretend to be pirates in the rigging. Rose was always head pirate, which meant she got to wear the eye patch. Until we were 6, she was my best and only friend. But once we started different schools, we hardly saw each other. And for the last piece, I'm going to skip ahead, so I'm afraid if you haven't read this, I'm going to spoil one part for you, but I tried not to pick out anything that everything else depended on. People always say, "It woke me in the middle of the night," as if anything momentous has to occur at the stroke of 12. But when the roaring sound barreled through my bedroom window, it was 3:47 in the morning. I knew because I jumped up, dodging Lynette's cot and the girls wrapped in blankets on the floor, and grabbed the alarm clock. Once I was awake, I barely heard it, but in my dreams, it was monstrous. I ran into my parents' bedroom and shook them, shouting, "Get up! Something's happening at the Johnson farm." Daddy burrowed deeper into his pillow, but Mama jolted upright. "What's wrong?" Beyond the cornfields, a bright orange pole glowed. By the time we got there, Daddy in overalls he pulled on top of his pajamas, Mama and the Johnson girls, and me in our long white nightgowns, and Joey in a t-shirt and pajama bottoms, all of us in unlaced boots. The fire in the Johnsons' kudzu field was blazing with wicked glee. We weren't the only ones who'd rushed over. Luther Moore and other farmers from down the road were already there, forming a bucket brigade to bring water from the creek. "Keep the children away," Daddy shouted. Mama kept Aggie and Catherine close, and Lynette hovered alongside. I grabbed an abandoned bucket and ran to the creek. The fire was gobbling dried grasses and sending runners toward the house. "Danny," Mama suddenly wailed. I realized he hadn't come with us. I hadn't heard him come home the night before, which meant he was asleep in one of the beds at the Johnsons'. And so was the KUDZU King. I dropped the bucket by the creek and dashed after Mama as she raced to the house, Catherine in her arms, Aggie and Lynette behind her. She pounded on the door, yelling, "Danny! Daniel!" The fire behind us grew more confident, eating up weeds and volunteer saplings. "Daniel!" Mama screamed. The door opened, and there stood Danny, his hair sticking up and a slow-witted look on his face. "Mama?" he asked. "What are you doing here?" Behind him, the KUDZU King looked much the same, with a day's growth of beard and a misbuttoned shirt. "Fire!" Mama pointed at the hungry tongues of flame licking at the peeling paint of the woodshed. "Get out of the house right now!" Aggie darted from behind Mama's legs and pulled at Danny's hand, while Lynette beside me stared as the fire cracked open the woodshed like a nutshell and dug into the sweet meat of split logs inside. Catherine wailed like a coyote. Mr. Culloway dashed back into the hall. "Where's he going?" Mama stroked Catherine's hair to calm her. "Papers," Mr. Culloway called, running upstairs. "There's no time for papers," Mama yelled. "Get out here now. These men need help." But he was down in a few seconds, a crate of neat file folders in his arms. He and Danny ran out of the house and veered in opposite directions. Danny toward the fire, grabbing a bucket from the yard and filling it with quick spurts of the pump. Mr. Culloway away from the fire with his precious box of papers. The chickens ran around in a frenzy. The 2 goats in the barn cried like babies for their mother. Danny fought the fire while Lynette opened the henhouse door and Aggie shooed the chickens out, waving her hands and yelling. They fled in an explosion of feathers, maybe never to return, but at least not trapped inside and burned to ashes. Mama and I ran for the goats and grabbed their collars. Mama, still holding Catherine, led them across the road where the fire would have nothing to eat. "Get a rope," she called, and I found one looped over the fence. She threaded it through the collars of both goats and tied them to a tree. "Remember, they're here. We'll move them if we have to." She kicked at the hog pen until the fence came down and the hogs squealed off into the woods. Meanwhile, the men were putting out the fire in one part of the field, only to have it erupt in another. Mr. Culloway joined Danny at the pump and took the bucket from him as soon as he could fill it, running for the woodshed. Lynette and Aggie gathered more buckets from around the yard. "You fill," Lynette told Aggie, who took Danny's place at the pump, freeing him to attack the fire directly with Lynette and me. We waited for Aggie and Mama, who joined her, to pump the water as quickly as they could. "Forget the shed," Danny shouted. "It's gone. Keep the fire away from the house." But there was no keeping the fire away from the treat it had been saving for dessert. It licked up the new paint and dug into the old boards beneath it, climbing walls and racing through doors, eating window frames raw, hungry for everything it could reach. The house became a flare that brought people from miles away. The bucket brigade lengthened as more neighbors joined and divided as if by mitosis into several lines, creek to house, creek to woods, creek to field of formerly thriving KUDZU. The pump was abandoned, too close to the house, too slow, too dangerous. We stopped the fire before it could move beyond the Johnson farm, but not before it ate their house alive, leaving only charred bones. Lynette cried throughout, a steady stream of tears running down her soot-covered face while she passed buckets, while she stomped hungry little flames, while she held the little girls way too tightly. She never stopped to wipe them away. I don't think she even noticed. to like hit me with all those questions. But before that, I do want to just thank Flyleaf again for having me. This is so amazing. And to thank Jill McCorkle, who read this book before it even came out and wrote beautiful things about it. I'm so grateful. So I'm happy to answer any question you might have about the KUDZU Queen or about, my deep dark secrets. Yes, Lori.
I'm curious how you researched KUDZU in that time period, and is this based on truth?
This is based on fact. Yes, so KUDZU was brought over for the World's Fair around the turn of the previous century, and it was originally sold by this one nursery as an ornamental, and then think about, the 30s, think about the Depression, think about the Dust Bowl. So it was the miracle plant. It was supposed to save everything. And in fact, in Japan, it is a very useful plant because in the U.S., we are known for importing plants and animals, but not importing the rest of the food chain. So it gets out of whack. So the Department of Agriculture did, in fact, produce pamphlets to teach farmers how to properly propagate KUDZU, and the Civilian Conservation Corps sent young men out to plant it along railway embankments. And there were KUDZU kings. There was someone called the KUDZU King, actually, Channing Cope, who wrote for the Atlanta Constitution. And then there were men who made it their life's work to promote KUDZU throughout the South and had these festivals and competitions. So, yes, it's true.
So we have that.
All story's fictional, but the facts are true. Wait. So what else?
How did you come to this story with the KUDZU and finding that? I mean, doing the research. I'm always curious, like where the fact finds the story.
That's a great question. So I first read about this on microfiche, which will tell you how long ago I found out about this. I knew about KUDZU, of course. I'd grown up, with it, and I always think of it as Southern topiary. Don't leave your cow out in the field overnight. But don't ask me A, what I was doing on microfiche, and B, why I was looking at KUDZU. But I came across this story. I think I was looking for something else, and I came across a story about these men that were promoting KUDZU. A fact story, and it was a newspaper story, not from the Times, but from a little bit later, I think. And I just thought it was intriguing. And how many of you grew up with KUDZU or have seen KUDZU over the years? So you gotta wonder why anybody would want more of it.
It smells nice.
And so I had to kind of do. It smells good. It's a beautiful plant, and it is in fact useful, as you'll find out in the book. All of these uses are true.
Wow.
Thanks. But I write for the same reason I read, to find out what's going to happen next. And so it took me a while to find Maddie. The original narrator was a young man. And then once I found Maddie, it was pretty much me chasing her around, writing down everything she said. Because she talks a lot, so it was pretty easy. Yeah. And then a lot of revising. This book was originally, when I had a full, complete draft, it was 680 pages.
Wow.
And I know some of you like me a lot, but so I took a book out of that book. And I call it playing pickup sticks. And we pull out a chapter here, a character there, a subplot there. Jill's nodding, she's in there. I write, well, at that point I wrote pages longhand, and I just had a ton of them. So finally I got it to where I thought, this is a book. This is it. Yeah.
Okay, so you eviscerated your baby. Were there any parts when you were cutting it up, like, because you have really lovely prose, right? Were there any parts of it that you were like, oh, I can't get rid of that, or I need to take that part and put it into something else because I can't lose that prose?
Great question. So I have what I call the pantry whenever I'm writing anything, and that's where I put things that I take out. So it's like I'm not deleting them permanently. I'm just putting them over here, and maybe I'll come back to them one day. I rarely do. I think I took one very short section out and put it back in. But mostly, once they're in the pantry, they're safe, right? They can just sit there like,
So that's the way you justify it to
jelly.
yourself to take them out.
That is, but there is one story that I do have to tell, which was my editor, John Ewell's in the back. And he's an amazing editor, and he is a ruthless editor in the nicest possible way. Everybody needs an editor that good, and luckily I get to live with him. So he read this book when I was like, okay, this is it. You know, if there's anything that you think I should change, you got to tell me now because I'm sending it out. He'd already read it before. So he read the book and he came to me and he said, I don't think you're going to be very happy with me. I have to tell you something. And so I said, okay. And he said, you know that whole part, what you know, that you think is the climax of the book, that 40 pages, it's got to go. The book ends here, and all of that 40 pages is anticlimactic, and I think you probably need to take it out.
Wow.
So, to the credit of our relationship, he's not just my editor, he's my sweetheart, years and years and years, decades now. I was able to walk away for a few minutes, and okay, maybe it was longer than a few minutes, and come back and say, you're right, it's got to go, and it's a better book for it. So it was painful because, it was such good stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's all of this stuff that happens, you know, in the competition, and you would have loved it. The prose is great, but it just meant the ending didn't work. So, yeah. Thanks for asking. It helps me able to tell that. No, it helps me able to tell that story. The pain lessens a little bit every time.
Walk it off.
Pardon?
Walk it off.
I would walk away because I got all these microphones. Anything else? Yeah.
I'm curious, is your writing process generally the same piece to piece, like whether you're working on a book or short story, or like do you have a kind of different way that you approach just like your setting, mood, all of that when you're writing different pieces, or is there just like a structure that you like to adhere to?
That is such a great question. Nobody's ever asked me that before. Well done. So
The whole time you were reading, I wasn't listening. I was just like, what is a unique question?
so great because you know it's really bad when I don't have enough questions now. So I was like, okay, well, you know, I guess we could go eat cake. There is cake, by the way, for after. So, so I write novels and poetry. I wrote short stories to get through grad school because, as Stuart Phillips will tell you, as we know well, that's what we had to do to get through grad school, and Elizabeth. But I'm not a natural short story writer. To me, short story is like a joke. You know, it's really all about the punchline, and it's not about the stuff that happens in the middle. And as anyone who knows me will tell you, I'm the world's worst joke teller. I'm always like rounding the curve into the punchline and suddenly remembering there was something important I was supposed to tell you that, without which the punchline is useless. So as soon as I could stop writing short stories, I did. And I wrote my first novel, which is still sitting in a bottom drawer waiting to be resurrected, right out of grad school because at Warren Wilson, where several people in the audience went along with me, I kept hearing about people who graduate and then never write another word. And so what I decided was that, and this is great advice for anybody who wants to write, I would write 15 minutes every day. It didn't have to be good, it didn't have to be smart, it didn't have to make sense, it didn't have to connect with what I wrote yesterday, what I was going to write tomorrow. If I missed a day, I didn't have to write a half hour the next day. I just started again with 15 minutes. And I wrote that first novel in about a year or two, which is a lot faster than this one. And, you know, because sometimes I wrote longer than 15 minutes. So for years and years, I wrote everything longhand on legal pads, and I still have boxes and boxes of legal pads for my poor biographers since I don't have children. Or nieces and nephews if I don't have biographers. And so I tend to just write as if I'm hearing things. I hear voices. And I'm seeing some nodding in the audience. I'm the only person that hears voices. That's a relief because otherwise, you know, we'd all be carted away. But I write fiction and poetry for very different reasons. I write fiction because somebody is telling me a story and I want to get it down and I want to understand what that story is. And I revise once I've got the story. So I have these hundreds and hundreds of pages longhand, and then I'm a winger. How many of you are planners? You know what you're going to wear tomorrow before you go to bed tonight? You're a planner. Very few in this audience. Okay, a lot of artists and writers. And the motto of a winger is, how can I know what I mean until I see what I say? So that's me. So I write.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that phrase?
How can I know what I mean until I see what I say? I feel like that's me, really. So I write these pages and pages and pages and pages, and then once I've got several hundred pages, I start shuffling them around and putting them in order, and then I start typing them up, which is where the revision process starts. Now, at this point, I do writing on the computer, but I still write lots and lots of pages. And for the new book that I've recently started, I did start writing longhand again because the computer was running dry. This is a longer answer than you probably wanted.
It's great.
But I write fiction and poetry for very different reasons. So fiction is because I want the story. I want to find out what's going to happen next. And the only way I can do that is to write it. Poetry is for me a way of understanding how the world works. So my poems are really about, this is my understanding of this. And I'm going to give it to you in the hopes that you'll read it and you'll go, yeah, I've always felt that way, but I've never known how to say it. I have I have poems that I have, printed out and taped up on my office walls and doors. And the best thing that could happen for me as a poet would be to know that someone has done the same, that this poem helps them through a hard time or makes them laugh or helps them understand the world a little bit better. So, yeah, thank you for that question. What else? Yes.
I'm assuming at some point you feel like you're like bursting with like creative energy, right?
Some days, yes.
So, like, I feel the same way a lot. And when I start, it's like I can't stop. What do you do to like calm yourself down?
That's a really good question. Drink less coffee. That's always helpful. Walking. I love walking in the woods, and sometimes that makes me burst with more ideas. Like I walking or swimming have always been really great things for me to come up with the things and solve problems. Walking, talking with a friend, hanging out, glass of wine, that sort of thing. That always helps. Yeah. Yes.
Why not just write when you have so much creative energy? Why not just write?
Oh yeah, well, but sooner or later there comes the end of the writing day and you get to sleep. So yeah, when I'm bursting with energy and I have time to write, then I'm definitely writing. And what I love to do, which I haven't done in years because I've become such a workaholic, is to give myself writing weeks where I do nothing but write for the whole week. And I figuratively park my car around the corner and don't answer emails or the phone. I'm not good at that anymore, but I think I may have to do that to write the new book because I've made some really rash promises in front of people about what's going to be done, so that may take some sitting down and writing. But you're right, Aruna, you definitely want to be writing when you've got that energy as much as you can.
How about the opposite, when that creativity isn't striking you and you're just looking at that blank page?
Yeah, so sometimes I do this thing called a 1,000-word sentence where I just write whatever comes into my head, and then I go back and I note what strikes me from that, and is there anything there that's useful to me. When I would do the 15 minutes a day, I gave myself permission to write absolute crap. So I think that's the thing. Sometimes you have to write your way through the stuff. You think I know this since I wrote a book in which people milk cows and goats, and I did actually milk cows and goats. It's one of the things that I know from personal experience. But I can't remember what's the stuff called that comes out before the milk comes. There's what is it? Colostrum? Colostrum. So I think sometimes you have to get through the colostrum to get to the milk. Does that make sense? It is important stuff, yeah. But it's also, it's on the way to the thing that you think you want. Yeah. But I write a lot of crap. And give myself permission to not think it's precious. That's one of the best things that's happened to me over the years, is that I'm not precious about my writing anymore. I like having good editors. I want people to tell me what's working and what I need to do to make it even better. So that helps a lot. And then there's always research. I can research till the cows come home and stand in the field and get covered by kudzu. What else? Anything else? Yeah. Nice catch.
No,
I think it was just
gravity just decided to assert itself.
Yeah.
It can be tricky. Are you good?
That is cool.
Not touching your phone.
Wow, I love it.
Electronics are creepy.
Yeah, they're all talking back at us now. Yes.
Was there an inspiration behind the Johnson family and sort of how they went through the ringer throughout the book? What was the story behind that?
Boy, bad things kept happening to them, didn't they? No, I mean, that's the short answer. The long answer is, I like to think, as a teacher of writing and as a writer, I like to think of planting seeds early in a book that you cultivate and then you eventually harvest. And so it may not seem like a big deal at the beginning, but then it happens. And so I really do write to find out what's going to happen. I didn't know all these terrible things were going to happen to the Johnson family, and boy, I feel like kind of a schmuck for being so cruel to this one poor family. Except I love what happened to Lynette at the end, or what she became at the end, and what happened to her sisters. But I think, I would write something and it would tell me what to write next. I also think another metaphor for it is, I used to play in creeks a lot when I was a kid. I love playing in creeks. My dream house has a creek, at least beside it, if not running through it. But I often think of sort of crossing a creek on stones, that are in the creek. And sometimes you have to sort of pick the next stone, but you sort of stand there and you gauge where's the next step that's not going to send you reeling into the stream, getting soaking wet and getting your mom mad at you.
So kind of along those same lines, it sounds like it's a very kind of where's the story going to take you process. And at the same time, one of the things I loved about the book was the web of relationships that you really, and it wasn't just the Lynette, Maddie Lee relationship, but Maddie Lee and her mother, and Maddie Lee and Rose, and Danny and Aggie. I love that relationship. And just, I'm curious about how mapped out some of that web is, if at all. Okay.
Nothing. I mean, this is where the winger comes into play.
Yeah.
I just kept following them around. That Danny Aggie relationship. So Aggie, if you haven't read the book, is Lynette's middle sister, and she's my favorite character. You're not supposed to have favorites, and you're not supposed to have crushes on your characters, but I do have a crush on Danny.
That comes through.
But I didn't know. More characters kept cropping up, and everybody kind of wanted center stage. Glennis really wanted center stage, and I had to kind of go back a little. But to me, it's a little bit like my life. I mean, I look at all of these people that I know from so many different areas right here in this room. I love. Anybody ever see Harold and Maude?
Yeah.
I love people. They're my species. And I think that's what happens when I write. People keep multiplying because they have all these relationships and they need each other. Thank you. You guys are asking such great questions.
Is this the most intensive promotional effort that you've had to put into a book? And how's your experience of that so far?
And when are you on late night?
Yeah, I can't wait. Yes, I have never done anything like this in my life, and it's been amazing. So first of all, I was never on social media before this, and so I had to teach myself how to do this. And it's weird because it's like I don't like self-promotion. It's a little creepy, but that's what you kind of have to do. And so what I try to do is to sort of always make it fun and engaging. But it's a full-time job. I did a lot of work for money, a lot of teaching for money, up until this book came out, so that I could make this my full-time job for a period of time. Because I love the book, and I wanted to give it everything that I could. It's exhausting. I mean, there's so many tasks that multiply that I didn't expect. I have a publicist who's absolutely wonderful, Suzanne Williams, and she has been getting the word out. We divided the tasks, so I'm the one that contacts bookstores, and that's a lot of work. And just everything has the characters, everything has 16 things attached to it. So it's a lot to do, but it's also amazing. I wasn't expecting this. I wasn't, okay, so maybe I'm a little goofy, but I thought my friends will buy the book and they'll put it on a shelf somewhere and, you know, maybe they'll read a page or two, but they're not going to read the whole thing unless they really, 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 really love me. And then I'll never hear from them because, you know, they'll just think, well, I really, you know, I can't tell her I didn't love the book. But I've been getting like play-by-plays from people as they read the book, you know, and that's amazing. And to read reviews by people that I've never met, you know, and to have the reviews be so good, and to be in, you know, best of, you know, early 23, I didn't expect it, and so it is a wonder, and it makes all of the work worthwhile. It's really special, and to have you guys here, to have people I love in my life. I mean, I've also gotten people in my love back. People I love back in my life. You know, my entire high school is now back in my life, and most of them I haven't seen. So I'm looking at them and I'm like, who is this old woman? Who is this old woman? You were 14 last time I saw you. But it's
Do they try to
special.
figure out who they are in the book?
Nobody has done that yet. Actually, I'm waiting for somebody to come up and go, "Yeah, I'm playing. That's right." So you know, it's been like the best homecoming reunion party ever, and then to meet new people. I went up to Blacksburg, Virginia, and that bookstore made it their book club book. And so there were 30 people in the audience, all of whom had read the book, and only one of whom I'd ever met before, who was somebody I went to high school with. And so they were asking some pretty intense questions. Yeah, they wanted the book to go on another 100 pages so the KUDZU King could get the shit beaten out of him. So, anyway,
Could you pull some stuff from the pantry? And
Yeah.
Yeah, here you go. What's your email address? Anything else? Other questions? Yes.
So knowing that you constantly make yourself better and better at your writing, because I've worked with you, now that you're reading it, do you find parts that you would say, oh, wish I'd done this or wish I'd done that? Or...
I was sure I would. And there, you know, every once in a while I'll find a tiny inchy bit, but John has always said that he works on his pieces really hard because he wants to be able to read them 20 years later and just feel like he did it exactly right. Everything was exactly the way that a piece is perfect. And so I feel like I worked on this piece enough that it is the book I wanted to write. And I remember I studied with Doris Betts, whom some of you know, and she was my hero. She taught me that tough Southern women drink Jack Daniels, and she used to write her comments in beautiful calligraphy on our papers. And she was a hard ass. She the best advice she ever gave was, she said, victim stories are boring, right? So don't write victim stories. And she said, you will come back and look at a book or a story or whatever, and you will wish you had done something different, but it is always the best you could have done at that time. So right now, I'm not far enough distant from it to kind of go, oh, but I feel pretty good about it.
That's good. That's got to be a great feeling, I would think.
It is.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing. Yeah. I don't think I've ever worked so hard on anything in my life. One of the things that I did after it was accepted, and after the editor went through it, and I thought she would tear it to shreds. I mean, not John, my primary editor, but the editor-in-chief and the founding editor and publisher of Rebel House. So I thought she would tear it to shreds, and she was so gentle. You know, she took out all the commas before buts, and she put in the Oxford comma everywhere. So basically, she just migrated commas. I'm not an Oxford comma fan. I'm sorry, I'm the last remaining Oxford. I'm sorry. Anyway, I live with an Oxford comma fan. It's, you know, we've got to divide the house up. But so I got it back, and I thought, I have to go over this book again. And so I went through it, and I found every anachronism I could find. I'm sure that somebody's going to email me and say, blah, 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 blah. But I looked for words that were not used in 1941. Like some of you may have heard me say this, but the word sharp for a sharp dresser didn't come around to about 45.
Wow.
So that became smart, which was around in 41. And I also looked for all the foods that weren't around. And I discovered in the process that this book is full of food. So the companion
It's a
book for the
southern
next
book.
novel is going to be a cookbook.
Yeah.
So I made as many changes in this book after it was accepted, after the editor had gone through it. I made as many changes as there are pages in the book.
Wow.
320 changes in this book. Yeah, Chris.
What was the one where you called the company to make sure food was available?
Oh my gosh. So I'm a Hershey girl, but my dad was a Bosco boy. Anybody ever heard of Bosco chocolate syrup? Okay. So he used to tell us about Bosco, and I thought, okay, I think he once bought it for us, and it was good, but it wasn't Hershey syrup. But anyhow, he grew up with Bosco, and I put Bosco syrup in the book, and then I had this moment of, oh my gosh, what if Bosco wasn't sold in 1941 in rural eastern North Carolina? So I went to the website thinking I'm fine, if it's Bosco, they've got to have a history of Bosco, right? No. So, but they did have a phone number. So I called up the Bosco company and I said, hi, this is going to sound like a really strange question, but I'm a writer and I'm publishing a book, and I have one of my characters talking about Bosco, and I just want to know, did you sell Bosco in rural North Carolina, rural eastern North Carolina in 1941? And the woman went, I don't know. And then I don't think she even covered the phone, and she just yelled, hey, did we sell Bosco in 1941 in North Carolina? And then I hear this guy yell back, yeah, we sold it all over the country. Okay, you're good. So yes, Bosco syrup is good. Lemon bars are not. And probably the 1960s. Did everybody know that but me?
Yeah.
Yeah. I had no idea. It's probably a good thing because originally Rose gave Maddie some lemon bars to stick in her purse, and that's never a good idea.
No.
Yeah. Yes.
So, I'm not the best at geography, but I don't think we have a Cooper County in North Carolina.
You are so right. We do not.
And I don't know if we have a Pinesboro.
I don't think we do. I tried to make sure that we didn't.
So I was curious about your choice to fictionalize the town and the county rather than choosing actual places.
Great question. So for those of you who did not go to 4th grade in North Carolina, there are 100 counties in North Carolina, and I had to make up 101st county for North Carolina for this reason. Can you imagine the emails and phone calls and letters I would have gotten? That hardware store wasn't there. Why'd you make us sound so stupid? There was no river, there was no creek, there was no... Yeah, so I had to make it up basically in self-defense, because then I could do anything. So what's interesting, though, is I really wanted to have a pretty good balance of fact and fiction. I tried to make the geography work for Eastern North Carolina. I tried to make the agriculture work. A lot of my research was going back over and over again to look at growing season for corn, cotton, tobacco, and kudzu, which is harder to find. And to find out, how high was the corn at this point? How high was it at this point? When do you harvest it? What attacks it? For those of you who haven't read this far, there is a mention of Gossypium hirsutum. So if you haven't read that part, I recommend that you look it up. It's when, in Ireland, we used to call it taking the piss. So it's at one point where Maddie's father is taking the piss out of the KUDZU king, and he mentions Gossypium hirsutum. So, so basically, I wanted to make sure that I was as protected as I could be. I mean, if people find errors, there will always be errors, but I tried to get rid of as many as I could, and make sure that nobody would feel that I had maligned their county. Anything else? Other questions? Nobody's asked me anything really radically embarrassing yet. I'm willing to answer this question. Well, I understand there was cake back there, decorated by this amazing woman named Anne at your Walmart, who's now my new best friend. Sorry for those people who were already my best friends. But she's, we've got cake, we've got kudzu cheese straws with kudzu jelly, we've got chocolate chip cookies, and lots of wine. So hang out. If you haven't gotten a book yet, I think there's probably some more books available now. You guys, thank you for being here. Thanks to Flyleaf. Thank you for everything.
Dessert before dinner?